to another of the Teaching Academy PD series. Today's session is all around Zoom. We look at periodically at Zoom or online meetings, as CSU likes to badge it, which is our online meeting product we use for tutorial delivery, etc., online workshops that are student facing is generally the distinction that we make between that and using Teams, for example, which is usually staff to staff. Zoom is the chosen product for learning and teaching activity that is student facing. We run this session, if not every session, every sort of second teaching session. One of the reasons for that is to do with the fact that the vendor, so Zoom, update the products regularly, and I'm being generous with my use of that term. They do it a lot. They change features around it. They change the interface. They add functionality. Sometimes they remove functionality. So it is necessary to run refreshers, not for people that are just new to Zoom itself, but people that have been using it for a long time who just may not be aware that new stuff has happened in the tool. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to have a look through sort of a basic refresh of the interface, look at any of those new features and other aspects. What I would say in this session is I really encourage you to drop stuff into the chat as we're going. If you've got questions around things, I will be stopping at different times to sort of field questions and comments and chat about different aspects with you. But if you have something burning, by all means, drop it into the chat. I'll stop talking and we can get into that a little bit as well. We're not precious about that at all. I'm joined this morning by Alex Barnes-Keegan. Alexander, sorry if I've stepped over the line there, Alex, but from DIT, who is in the Learning Technologies unit, who end up supporting a lot of the tickets that are lodged around Zoom use for academics. And we'll also have Adam Webster in here in a moment from DLT, who fields tickets quite often that are submitted from schools and academics looking at application of Zoom. So on the one hand, you get tickets about systems access and things not working, and then the other type of ticket is usually what you're doing with it inside Brightspace, for example, things like that. So we have kind of both sides of that coin covered in terms of who's looking at the chat, and we might chat to them a bit later on as well about the type of problem areas that get logged the most and things like that. All right, so look, I'm going to start sharing this slideshow a little bit. Most of today will be spent in the interface itself, in the tool. But if you're curious about what it is that I'm referring to, it's on that Padlet board that I've shared. So let's open this up. And I'll give a little bit of a preamble about Zoom itself. The first thing I want to clarify is that when we talk about Zoom at CSU, you need to be aware that there are kind of three, I'm not going to say types of Zoom, but there are three terms that are used when we're talking about supporting Zoom, and you need to really be clear about the distinction between them. And those are the Zoom desktop application, and I'm going to show you what each of these things are, which is referred to as Workplace, Zoom Workplace. The Charles Sturt Zoom portal, which is a website that staff go to log in, sign into Zoom and access what we call the back end of their account. And then the third one is a thing called the Zoom LTI, which loosely speaking is Learning Technology Integration, which is how we can access Zoom inside our subject sites. So those are three different ways of getting to Zoom. But sometimes, particularly when you're sort of getting support around this product, someone might be referring to the app and you're not really sure whether or not they're talking about the website that you're accessing or whether they're saying going somewhere else that you need to open. So we just want to point out the differences between those three things so that we're all on the same page. And good morning, Adam.
Thanks, Lachlan.
No, we're happy to have you with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Zoom desktop app first. So let me move this slideshow off the screen. I've dropped it into the chat, Adam, but maybe Alex can drop the Padlet board link in there for you. All right, so when we talk about the desktop app, if you're on a CSU device, you're going to find that there's an icon likely on your desktop, like this Zoom one down here, that will open it. If you can't see it, or if you're on your own device at home, you can just do a quick search for the word Zoom and you're going to find it at the top of the list. So there it is, the Zoom Workplace desktop app. And when you open that up, you'll get this little screen that will have these 4 icons that you're probably familiar with seeing. And this is one way of getting to Zoom, the Zoom desktop app. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the features that you get access to in each of these things, but essentially that's one way of getting to it, and you can either search for it or find the icon. You'll notice that you can launch Zoom meetings immediately from here. You can schedule meetings, and there's a lot of crossover in the functionality between these different ways of getting to Zoom. You can do a lot of the same things in each spot. Importantly, one of the most popular reasons for coming to the Zoom desktop application is because this is where you can update Zoom if you haven't already. And when you go to the top right hand corner of the desktop app, find where your little icon is for yourself and left click on that. There will be a list, and halfway down you'll see check for updates. This is something that you need to do periodically to make sure that you're running at least a semi-recent version of Zoom. And as I mentioned at the start, they update this thing very, very frequently, like at least once a month. A lot of the time that's not going to have a critical impact on your use of Zoom, but that's not all the time. And I can remember post-COVID, Zoom had an update, and if you hadn't installed it, for example, you couldn't engage in a lot of the interactive tools within Zoom if you hadn't updated. You couldn't do quizzes, for example. You couldn't use the polls. In some ways, you couldn't even use the chat function. You could see it all, but you couldn't engage with it unless you'd updated. So that is an example of a critical update. It doesn't happen a lot, and you'll see even now, myself, I'm apparently 3 versions old, and I'm someone that uses this tool a lot. So you can't update it when you're running Zoom, but you can certainly just do that and run it. The update usually takes about, sort of 20-30 seconds to do. Very, very quick. All right, so one of the main reasons you would use the desktop app in the first instance is to update. And the other thing that I encourage you to look at is to make sure you know how you can quickly check that you are signed in to Zoom. And this is particularly for academics or markers, to make sure that you're signed in as your CSU self. And the way that you can do that is, again, by left clicking on your icon, and you'll see the email address that you're signed in as under your name at the top there. Can everyone see that? That tells me that I'm signed in as Lachlan at CSU, as opposed to people that have other Zoom accounts. And that's the type of ticket or job that gets logged quite often for markers or other people who can't access a Zoom meeting as a host, for example, and it's because they're trying to sign in with a different account. So the way that we kind of head this off is, before you launch a Zoom meeting, open the desktop app and just check that you're signed in with your actual work account. That's what you want to be doing. If you're not sure about it, that you're in the right, you can always sign out at the bottom and then sign back in with your work credentials, and you'll at least know that you've signed into the tool correctly. So desktop app updates and you sign in. There are other features that we'll talk about later, but those are the 2 main reasons that I would point you towards the desktop app. All right. The next one that we're talking about is the Zoom portal, and I think this is probably the one that a lot of staff at the uni are the most familiar with. And if I bring my browser window back over here, when we talk about the CSU Zoom portal, we're talking about going to charlessturt.zoom.us. That's the base address. And it brings up this screen. And the only option you really want to be looking at this point is clicking on Sign In. And if you haven't already signed into a CSU system anywhere, it's going to ask for your work credentials, the same that you use to get into Teams, to get into the leave portals, to get into the staff portals, all that stuff. Same work credentials. And this brings us into the CSU Zoom portal, which is loosely referred to as the back end of Zoom. And what that means is that you can get access to all of the settings attached to your account through the back end portal. I would probably suggest there's too much information on hand here for you most of the time. There's a lot to kind of go through. But this is another way of accessing Zoom, is coming into the back end. So the desktop app we call the front end, and the desktop and the Zoom portal that we're looking at here, this website, is the back end. But again, you can sign in here, and if you're clicking on your profile icon in the top right hand corner, again, you can see, what am I signed in as? There's my work ID right there. So I am signed in with the right account. What kind of information do we get access to in here? Well, on the left, if we look through this menu that's here, you can see we can get access to our list of meetings that we've scheduled. And when we click on meetings, we get this lovely big blue button up here that says we can start scheduling meetings from here. We can get access to Zoom webinars if you're someone that's used those before. They're not really used that much now by most teaching staff, particularly since we started using Teams for a lot of things like this PD today. Most of the time we're using Zoom for meetings, for learning and teaching activity, as opposed to webinars. Webinars give you access to slightly different functionality, but today we're talking about Zoom meetings. Other things of interest in the back end of Zoom, in the portal, you can get access to, I'll talk a little bit more about the hub and whiteboards later on, but more importantly, you can get access to your recordings here, a full listing of any recordings that you as a host have made. What do we know about recordings in Zoom? They don't last forever. They last for 12 months and then they will auto-delete. There is a process that you can log a ticket to have them be kept alive for a little bit longer, but your recordings will not stay in Zoom forever. You have to do something with them if you want to keep them longer than that. So in the event that you have them being used in your subject sites, they're available to students in that teaching session and in that site for a period of 12 months, and then they will go. They will self-delete. So it is important to keep that in mind. You don't get to keep recordings for longer than 12 months in Zoom. At that point, you've got to get them out, download them, and put them somewhere where they're not going to be deleted. YouTube is an example. Panopto is another example. They're probably the two most common ways that we would preserve recordings if we needed to. Some other features in here that I'd point out to you, you can get a full listing of the settings attached to your Zoom account. If you ever want an activity that will fill up an entire afternoon, come in here, click on settings, and you're going to see organized under all of these different tabs, all of the settings that sit behind your Zoom account. Most of the time when people are coming in here, they're trying to look specifically for functionality that may not be turned on. As an example, if you can't see transcripts when you finish a Zoom meeting and you want to hold it for transcript, it's probably because it's not turned on in your settings. So you might come in here and search for the thing that you're looking for and say, I want to see any settings attached to transcripts. And at that point, it'll then take you to the area in the settings that you can find it. So it's, as long as you have an idea of what it is that you're looking for, this can be a quick process. Otherwise, you're looking through all of these different tabs at the top, which will take you through a very long list of settings attached to your account. It's probably worth doing at least once so you have an idea of what's in there, but it's not something that you're going to be doing a lot of. So things like your recording settings are worth looking at least once to see what format your recordings are going to take. Whether you want your recordings in a Zoom meeting, for example, to show all of the webcams in the room, the gallery view, or do you just want them to show whoever's doing the talking when the recording is downloaded? Those sorts of individual settings can be controlled by going into the recording area and working through. You can also decide who's getting access to recordings in here, but a lot of these settings are set at a default level across the university. You have the discretion to change a lot of them if you want to. So you can go through that settings list and sort of say, well, I'd like that or I wouldn't want that, and you can adjust them. If you're confused about any of the settings in there and want to chat to me about them at some point, just reach out. I'm happy to do that. All right, so the settings is an area that a lot of people would come into the back end or the CSU Zoom portal to access. And the other thing that you might be trying to get from here is access to report information, which is when people are looking through statistics around student analytics, who's coming to the meetings, how long they stayed in for. You can access some of that information from here, but you have to keep in mind that most students at CSU, when they join a Zoom meeting, are coming in as a guest. Effectively, they're anonymous because the tool is set up like that to allow people just clicking on the link to join the meeting. So in many cases, whilst it might pick up the name that they've put for themselves when they join the meeting, it may not necessarily give you their email address or their sort of login details or anything. We get a lot of guests coming up with access to Zoom. All right, so that is the Zoom portal, the second of our two areas that I talked about today. We looked at the desktop app very briefly. We've now looked at the CSU Zoom portal very briefly. And the third one that I'm going to look at, can we get stats on who watches a recording? Technically, yes, Joe. And if I show you some of my recordings, I'll show you why I'm being slightly hesitant around that response. If I go into recordings and transcripts and find a recording that I've done, and here's one for a subject, for example, that I helped set up. If I click on that recording, it'll allow me to download it, but you'll see that there's also a recording analytics option. And when I jump into that, it asks me to do a bit of a filter to say, well, when are we talking about? I might kind of go, I can't quite remember when this was made, so I might just try my luck and say, how about beginning of last year sometime? And what you'll notice straight away is that when you're looking at analytics in Zoom, it will only let you search over a period of 1 month. So you have to know what the window is that you're looking for those dates. So it's not just kind of open for all time type analytics. And even then, you'll notice that at the moment it's telling me that no one watched it and no one downloaded it in that period of time. So you do need to kind of have an idea of that window of time. And what it's going to give you ultimately is a list of people that have accessed it, but a lot of them will come in as guest. So you won't see usernames. So you'll see the number of clicks and how long they were watching it for and what have you, but it's in most cases not going to give you the individual's names. So it is of limited value, I would argue. All right, so let's now look at the third way of accessing Zoom when we talk about it and when we support Zoom, which is the LTI, which is our Brightspace integration. And if we were to go into a subject site, and I've picked on this one for the moment, we find the Zoom LTI living underneath our communication tools. And it's the second option, online meeting Zoom. The tool itself takes a few moments to load. It will probably take a little longer for me because I have access to too much in the back end. All right, so you'll also notice that you start getting pop-ups at the moment about some of Zoom's additional features that use AI, etc. A lot of these have been disabled at CSU. If it's related to AI use, that's to do with goes through a bunch of other sort of committees and scrutiny over whether it's going to be problematic for us to use. But you can turn off those tools if you want to, those updates. All right, so this is the LTI in Brightspace. It's where the students can come. If you can see it in here, then the students probably can as well. And the main things to look for in here are our tabs across here that tell us are these meetings that we have currently scheduled. And in this case, because this meeting doesn't have a date, it's been set as a recurring meeting, it'll stay in this list forever. And we can schedule new meetings inside this tool, and I'm going to do one of those in a moment. We can look at all meetings that have been held in the past in this subject site. And we also get access to the Cloud Recordings tab, and that will show us all the recordings that were made in this class, the dates that they were made, and the students can come in here, for example, and download the individual recording files from here, whether they want the audio version, the video version, or they can also get hold of the chat file. You'll notice that the transcript is not provided in here. So we were talking about transcripts before. You can get the transcript from your Zoom recordings from the back end, from the portal. It's not provided by default to the students inside this tool. You would need to manually give it to them some other way if you wanted to. All right, so the Cloud Recordings tab, it's also worth pointing out that by default, any recordings that appear in here are available to students unless you go across to the top right-hand corner where you can see Publish All Recordings. It's currently turned on. If you were to disable that function, all of these recordings now have an option to toggle on publishing yes or no. So if you have recordings that you don't want students to see, you leave it toggled off. And if you have some that you do, you toggle it on. So you do have control over individual recordings if you want to, but by default, Publish All Recordings is turned on. And the only recordings that are going to be appearing in this list are the ones that are coming from the meetings that you have set up inside this tool. So it's not getting recordings that you've made elsewhere in the back end of Zoom or in other subjects, for example. By default, you create meetings in here for your students, like your tutorials each week. As the recordings are finished, then they will automatically appear to students inside this tab. All right, so we've had a bit of a lightning tour of our three main ways of accessing Zoom at CSU: the desktop app, the portal itself, the CSU Zoom portal, and the Zoom LTI, which is our Brightspace integration. I now want to spend a little bit of time looking at the interface. What is the meeting summary tab? Well, this is a new feature that is that utilizes AI essentially to make a summary of what was captured in the meeting. So it'll look at the chat, it'll look at the video recordings, and it will make a summary of it, the tool. It can be disabled inside your personal settings. It's a new tool, and I don't know whether retrospectively it will be scrutinizing those recordings. And at the moment, there's nothing in there, which suggests to me that it's either disabled and we can't access it, or it will only work sort of from meetings made from now on, since that tool has been turned on. Maybe that's a note for Alex and myself to look into after this meeting to see which of those it is. But at the moment, whilst the tab is there, it doesn't look like there is any sort of retrospective functionality happening. All right, I want to spend a bit of time going for a walk through the Zoom interface itself. Please continue to put things into the chat, etc., as you want to do. To launch a meeting at this point, I'm going to go back to our Zoom desktop application because, as I mentioned, that's a quick and easy way of doing that. So here's my Zoom desktop app, and I'm just going to launch a new meeting on the spot. Now I can run Zoom at the same time. What I'm going to actually do is turn off my webcam in Teams so that I can use it inside Zoom. So disable that and say, how about my webcam? Here we go, I was there. Brilliant. All right, so it gives you a preview before you start any Zoom meeting where you configure the sound source, your microphone, your speakers, and also your headset. If you've got multiple webcams and things, you can choose from that list there. And you get that preview. I'm going to, telling me that my speaker volume is low. That's very interesting. Anyway, it shouldn't be a problem. Let's start. And we're into Zoom. We'll go full screen and we're going to go through a bit of a walk into the Zoom interface because this has changed a bit recently. So at the moment, we're looking at a webcam shot of the speaker in this meeting, the person doing the talking. Zoom will automatically put that person front and center. So that's me at this point in time. And we'll go for a walk around the edges here to look at the functionality that we can get access to. Bottom left, we'll start with, you can see that your audio and video settings are still down there. You can adjust where your input and output for your audio settings are. You can also change your video settings down here if you need to after the fact, but that's all that there is down there. We move across to the middle, what they call the taskbar in Zoom, and this has become much more consolidated in recent times. There used to be a large collection of icons down the bottom. We now only have a handful. And what we can see firstly is the share button. In our Zoom meeting, if we click on share, it brings up some options for us. What are we sharing? We have the choice to share things on different screens. This function remains the same. We can choose individual application windows, like I could share my web browser, Chrome in the background somewhere. Zoom I've got running, I could just share Zoom. And then underneath we have a new area of functionality, which is to choose particular tabs inside a browser, for example. That is part of one of the more recent updates. So if you only want to share one tab from Chrome and nothing else, you can choose that option from the share area as well once you've updated Zoom. So when you install that update, you're going to see that option there. I'll also point out that over on the right-hand side, you should also be looking at how you want that share information to be displayed. At the moment, it's set for just share the content. But you also have the option to say, I want you to share the content, but I want my head in the background. So if I choose that option, and I say, how about you share what's happening in my web browser, like in Chrome. Let's move Zoom onto a different screen for a second. I'm just going to get my browser up. I say, yeah. Just get my share settings. Just being a little careful about what it is that I'm displaying to you at the moment. Hang on. Right, share. So I want you to share this screen over here. No, that's the wrong one. Different screen. Can get quite confusing sharing multiple screens sometimes. That one's no good. Let's go with that one. And I want you to put my head in the background. Okay, let's try that. Oh, that's showing the wrong screen. Hang on, let's change again. Share. Let's try that one. Okay, what does that look like for you? Okay, so now you've got the presenter's head essentially talking underneath the shared content. Yeah. I mean, it takes a little bit of fiddling. To be honest, I don't use these sorts of bells and whistles with Zoom most of the time. When I use Zoom, I basically say, share my whole screen that's over there, and that's it. And then all I have to worry about is whatever I'm doing on that screen is what's being shared to the audience. So this is me playing around with bells and whistles that I wouldn't normally share in a Zoom meeting, because maybe, and particularly if you're making a recording that you want to be part of your learning materials moving forwards or something, then maybe you're trying to zhuzh it up a little bit, maybe, and make it a little bit more engaging. I'm not sure. Maybe you don't see any value to doing something like this, but head in a box was all the rage a couple of years ago, I'm sure. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing in this way, but I would point out to you, if I move this share bar across onto this screen, can you all see the share box at this point, or is it only showing you the window? Can you see this little green share box, Alex? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So you can move this around. Once you get the crosshairs, you can move that onto whatever screen you like. But one thing that's valuable about the share preview is that at the bottom, if you're not sure what it is the students are seeing, you can click on this little drop down and it will show you what they're seeing. So it's a quick way. Instead of me saying, can you all see my screen? Is everyone seeing this? You can actually use this little preview box to avoid that scenario. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to click on share again and choose my default option, which is to share whatever it is that's happening on the whole screen over there. And I'm only going to show the content at this point, which is what I would normally do in a Zoom meeting, and go that one, share it. There's my little preview saying, can they see my screen? Yes, they can see my screen. Great. And then I can move that little share window away. And now all you're getting is whatever it is that I'm doing on this entire screen. That's what you see. What you see is what you get. That's probably the easiest way to use sharing in Zoom. Now let me stop there. Have we got any questions from anybody or comments from our facilitators? We all good at that point? Okay. Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, when the students share their screen, have they also got that functionality?
Yes, it's a very good point. Who can share? Now, by default, in Zoom meetings at the account level, students cannot share. It's for the host to basically to do the sharing, but it can very easily be turned on and then they get the same functionality, right? So if I look at my Zoom settings and go to share and say, right, that's what I'm sharing. But if I get out of this and go, well, where would I find who can do what? It's a really good question because there's a couple of ways to get to this. We're talking about security settings. So by default, I'd probably go into this more section that's down the bottom and look for host tools, for example. And then if I look under my participants, it says, what can my participants do? They can use the chat, they can unmute themselves, they can start sharing their webcams, their video. At the moment, they can't record to their computer, but they can request it. They can also request for you to start recording if you haven't, and they can transcribe. There's nothing in there about sharing at the moment. But I can have that level of control over what they can and can't do. When I go to the advanced section, you'll notice that I have some more control over sharing. And at that point, it says who's able to share, and I can change it from both the host to any participant in the meeting. So if you want the students to be able to share, either you're turning this on so that anybody can share, or you have to give individuals in the meeting host rights so that then they have access to share. And then they have access to those same settings.
Yeah, because sometimes within a Zoom, student questions come up and I must have that option open. So students, I've got multiple users or something, or all participants, so they can certainly share. But I didn't know if they could then choose what it is that they're sharing with regards to that.
They get access
screen
to
profile,
all the same settings that you do, depending on how recently they updated Zoom. So the same things apply to them as to you, as to whether they see the full range of possibilities or just some of them. And that setting around sharing permissions is one of those things that you might go looking for in your CSU Zoom portal settings. If you were to type sharing or share into those settings and look through, it'll show you whether or not it's toggled on for everybody or not, and you could change that setting for every meeting that you go into, what your default settings are. So you can find it in the settings area.
It's set that it's a possible thing, but I think I'm still going to the share button at the bottom of the screen to allow them. Like you've got to hand over your host rights for someone else to come on or something.
Yeah, if they're requesting to do it and you're already sharing, it's going to prompt you to hand it over. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
That's okay. Any other questions at that point about sharing? Anyway, if any occur to you, by all means, let me know. All right, some of the basics. Let's look at some of the basics. Chat is one that I would bring up. A lot of the functionality that we get in Zoom will open in a new panel inside the interface, if we make this full screen, and it will let you either use it integrated, so it sits to the right of your recording, or you can use this pop-out function, at which point the chat window is something that you can move around, even onto another screen, for example, and resize if you want to. So if you're saying, I really want to keep an eye on the chat and see it in full detail, I'm going to make it bigger, I'm going to drag it onto another screen, and then I can watch what's happening without it compromising my other space. This is usually something that people think about doing when they've got multiple screens going, right? So they can keep track of different parts of the meeting. That's right, so pop out the chat. What can we do in the chat? We get access to some text formatting options, and you'll see that it's got a basic editor in there that lets you do things like bullets and bolding and underlining and strike through and different things. You can put in hyperlinks into the chat, indents. You can even put in code snippets. There's even a function in here that will allow you to do screenshots and drop those into the chat area as well, which is quite interesting. Most of the time we're just typing in chat, but there are other functionalities that Zoom builds in. You'll notice the screenshot option is down here at the bottom, where you could take a shot of something on your screen and it will drop it straight into the chat. So if I said, I want you to take a shot of this screen, just give me this bit, and say, yep, capture that. And then now inside the chat, it's dropped that little screenshot in for people to actually engage with in the chat. I then need to send it, to share it, and there it is inside the chat. That's not terrible functionality, just to be able to do that and drop it in, assuming that you've got something interesting happening. Yeah, it is. It's not the worst thing in the world. Popping in links, definitely you can do that. You can also add attachments that are in here, and it's that third option that says File. We click on File. It has a couple of integrations going. You could grab it from OneDrive, from Google Drive, from SharePoint, but most of the time, for most of us, we have these things just sitting on our computer. So if I wanted to share a file from my computer into the chat, and I said, yeah, I've got this document and it's right here, it's a Word document, so there you go. Share that in the chat. There it is. I'm not sharing it until I hit the little send button down the bottom. And now that Word document is now made available to students to be able to download if they want as well. So you can see that the chat over time has actually become quite sort of multimodal. It lets you do things with different types of files and formats of text, images, video, things like that. You can just drop those in. You can even drag and drop them into the chat as well. It's quite versatile. No other real surprises with the chat, but if you're always looking for more options in Zoom, look for the 3 dots. And in the chat function, you can see that the 3 dots will let us do things like save the chat if I want a copy of it. You can also limit who can do what with the chat, who you want being able to chat with who else. And you can also reintegrate that pop-out window back to the one screen by clicking on Merge. And you'll see that it drops it back here on the right-hand side. All right, so let's look at the other pop-out window we have access to, which is our participant window, and that will show you who's in the meeting. Again, we can pop that out if we want to, make it bigger, smaller. If you want to keep a track of who's in the meeting, you could move this onto another screen. But everyone that's joined the meeting, we're going to see their status in the meeting. In this case, this guy's the host, but you're going to have other participants in the meeting listed in here as well. And if you wanted to promote those people to co-host, etc., you would be hovering over them and then promoting them to host as well or co-host. Can I say, as a call out, you should never ever promote someone in a Zoom meeting to host. Even if you want to give them share rights, make them a co-host. If you hand away host rights, you can't get them back unless the person that is now the host then does the same back to you. So make them a co-host by all means if you want them to be able to share and do other things in the meeting and you can't find another way to do it, but never make someone else in the meeting the host, the main host. You can't get that back yourself. You then are reliant on them doing things. The participant window is also where you can keep track of people's webcams and microphones if you're looking for who's doing the talking and also being able to mute them. That functionality, whether it's muting an individual or mute all, is all available through the participant window, exactly the same as what it is in our Teams meeting on the right. You can see it as well. Same functionality, works exactly the same way. All right, a few other bits and pieces in terms of the Zoom interface for us to look at. Zoom has built in a whole bunch of reactions down the bottom of your meetings. Basic things like we have in Teams. This is a bit of a gimmick, but maybe you're using it to keep people engaged, asking for the audience, for example, to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they can understand things or not. It does include emojis and GIFs and other things. There are thousands in there. Maybe that's a distraction. Maybe people are using it positively, I'm not sure, but by default they are on. and you probably need to be aware that they're on. You can turn them off, however. All right, Host Tools is a button that allows you to control the security settings for the meeting. So if you want a meeting to not allow anyone else to join, only the people that are in there currently, you can turn on this lock meeting function, and that will prevent anyone else from joining the meeting. So for those of you using Zoom for things like assessment or a meeting that's particularly private or sensitive, etc., and you don't want any accidental joinings of the meetings, etc., you can lock it under the host controls. By default, the waiting room is on, which means that anyone that joins a Zoom meeting that doesn't already have a host in there will go into the waiting room, and they can't join the meeting until a host actually takes control of the meeting itself. You can disable the waiting room, but it is on by default. Turn off those host tools. Now, a bit of extra functionality, and Zoom has a whole bunch of this, so we'll look through some of these tools now. Sorry if this is a bit small. Can I zoom this in? No, it won't let me. The tools that are available under More now can individually be moved into your taskbar if you just want to see them with their own icons, but I'll go through them very briefly. Recording for the meeting can be turned off and on using the record function. There is a captions option. By default, captions are available to each individual participant, but they have to decide to turn them on. It's not something that that you need to do. They are available by default to everyone in the meeting. So if they want to see live captioning in the meeting, they would click Show Captions, and you can see that it's now appearing for this particular user, me, at the bottom of the meeting underneath. They can be turned on or off. You also have the option to hide those captions, and that'll get rid of them. All right, the transcript itself can be accessed from the More area. It can be downloaded from here by the individuals in the meeting as well. We also have access to our breakout rooms if you're using those for your activities. And breakout rooms by default, and I've put a video on using the breakout rooms function into the Padlet wall for today. But probably the most important thing to know about using breakouts in Zoom is that it has 3 phases: create, edit, and live. Create is where you don't have any breakouts and you're making them for the first time. So if I click on breakouts, I now have the ability to create some, but they're not live, and I'm not editing their existing functionality. It's just creating them so they have the potential to be used. So if I said, yep, create a breakout room, and I want any of the participants in the meeting to be assigned automatically, at the moment, it's giving me a summary of how many people that's going to affect. There's none in here at the moment, but it'll automatically show you at that point. If there's 20 students in the room and you create 4 breakouts, down here, it'll say 5 participants per room, right? And then we would create them. They're now ready to be launched, but they're not live. So we're now in the edit phase of breakouts, which means I can do some customizing of how these breakouts are going to work. Down here underneath options, for example, if I want participants to be able to choose their own rooms, if I want them to be able to return anytime, if I want to configure how long the breakouts stay open for example, those sorts of options can be modified during this edit phase. And again, the rooms are not live. They're just sitting there waiting for us to use them when we want to. And then when we actually want to launch them, we would use this Open All Rooms option down the bottom, at which point we now move into the live phase of breakouts. They're running, and anyone that's been put into a breakout is now sitting inside their breakout rooms. And you'll see the timer that says how long the breakouts are going to be running at the top of that little box there. You as the host have the ability to be able to join those breakout rooms. So I could say, right, I'm going to jump straight into this first breakout. Do I want to go in here? And it'll say, if I do that, it's going to stop my screen sharing in this main meeting, which is what I'm showing. You guys aren't in my Teams, in my Zoom meeting itself, so that's not going to affect you guys. But I'm now inside this first breakout room once it actually joins. And what you'll notice straight away, it says you're in a breakout room. So I know where I am. And a breakout room really is a whole brand new fresh Zoom meeting by itself. The functionality is almost identical, and it will allow you at that point to use things like the chat function, the share functions. Most of the functionality that you can use in a standard meeting is also available inside the breakout room. So everyone in a breakout is elevated in terms of their role to being a host. They can make decisions around using things like sharing, recording, but by default, your individual breakouts are not part of the recording that's happening in the main room. And that's usually somewhere where people using breakouts fall over a little bit, because maybe they expected that it would be captured, or that all the breakouts would be captured somehow, or maybe they didn't want them to be captured. But the recordings are not, when you start a recording in a Zoom meeting, it doesn't include what's happening in breakouts. So if you wanted those to be recorded separately, you would need to be telling the people in the breakouts to turn on their recordings so that they could capture that content separately, because it's basically a whole new Zoom room. All right, that's breakouts in a nutshell. I'm still inside this breakout, but what we'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner is the option to leave the breakout room, and pay careful attention to the language that's used there, because if I hit leave room, it also gives me the option to end the whole meeting, which you don't probably want to do when you're ending breakouts. And I'm pretty sure that most people have made that mistake at least once or twice, where they thought they were just getting out of the breakouts and they go end it, end it, end it. And what they've actually done is killed off the whole Zoom meeting. So at that point, I only want to leave the breakout room. So bring me back to the main room. We return to the session. And the breakouts are still going, but I'm in the main area. But what you'll see is I have the option here to close all the other breakout rooms, bring everybody back. I can also broadcast, which means I'm sending a text or an audio message to everybody that is in a breakout. So if I say broadcast, it says send a message, text message to everybody, like 1 more minute. And that will then appear at the top of the screen to everybody in all of the breakouts. Or I could actually do a voice broadcast, at which point it's capturing, when I click this button, what's in my mic. Everybody, you need to make sure that you remember to do X, Y, and Z before you come back to the main room. Okay? Stop that and send the broadcast. All right? At that point, it's already made it and sent it, but I can now do another one if I needed to. So there's a broadcast option, or I can in fact close all the breakouts, bring everybody back, and they get whatever timer you've set in your options for how long you want the breakouts to remain open when you say close it. Do you want it to close instantly? 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. You now get that wind down, and then they'll all be brought back once that time has finished. Let's stop there for a second. Any questions, comments about breakouts and things? Nope. Okay, good.
Can I just direct
ahead.
you to the chat, Lachlan? Joe had a question about the chat transcripts. What's that one? Students watching the recording, do they still have access to whatever has been placed in the chat? You have to supply the chat transcript afterwards.
Yeah,
is that correct?
It depends when and where they're getting it. So if they're in the live meeting, they can actually go to the chat area, and from the 3 dots, they can actually save the chat text file from there. Yep. Right? But it is an option that is configurable in your settings. So if you don't want them to be able to get access to the chat, go into the portal, into the back end, search chat, and then you'll see the option for whether it's on or off. So you can disable it or turn that on. But if it is on, not only in the live meeting will it be on, but as we saw before inside our subject site, next to the recordings, the chat file is available by default to students.
Oh, it's default. Yep. Okay. But right. If you supply, say, a PDF or a PowerPoint in the chat, that won't come across though. It'll just be a text reference in that chat file.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The file itself is not provided after the fact. You would need to provide that separately. Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Now, There are a lot of new functionalities in Zoom, and I'm going to be whizzing through a few of them in these last few minutes. I'm happy to hang around and talk about any of them after the fact, but in the interest of time, I want to show you a few bits and pieces, and then we can look at the sort of gimmicky new stuff, etc. Continuing of our tour around the interface itself, I'm now going to direct you towards the top right-hand corner. So let's close the chat. And look, because this is relatively new that they've moved all these functions up here to the top right. The first one is a little tick which talks about the security settings for the meeting. Probably not that interesting. Next one we have is a summary of transcription. And at the moment it says transcription's happening. And you can either turn that off if you want, or you can turn it on. There's a toggle for it here at the top now. That's a new thing. Then we have a timer. I'm using a meeting timer. You have the ability to turn one off or on, but at the moment it is showing me how long the meeting has been running for. You can actually change that to be counting down, for example. So if you set the meeting to go for an hour when you created it, it'll actually tick down from 60 minutes to show you how much you've got left. So you have some control over meeting timers if you want to use them. Then we move across and we'll see that there is an option that talks about transferring to room. That's not something you need to worry about really. It's talking about Zoom rooms, which most of us don't use. We use online Zoom meetings. So you can ignore that one. Then we get into our views. So that little waffle type icon that's there allows each individual user to decide how they want their view of Zoom to be. Every user in Zoom has control over what the room looks like for them. So if you want to turn around and say, I want to see everybody's face in here, I want the gallery view on, everyone that's joined the meeting, it'll show them all as tiles. Maybe you just want to see whoever's doing the talking, which is the view that it is on by default for students as well, the speaker view. You have control over those settings in here. There are a few other kind of gimmicky options that you can play with if you want to turn around and show multi-speaker, or the immersive view, which is a kind of virtual backgrounds view of people's webcams on a background. You can play around with those if you like, but by default, most people drift between either wanting to see the speaker view or wanting to see the gallery view, where they're seeing sort of your Brady Bunch of everybody that's in the meetings. There are some options there of changing sort of wallpapers and themes and things. If you don't want to look at yourself when you're in a Zoom meeting and you only want to see other people, then you would hide your self view. But it does rely on other people in the meeting having webcams on. Otherwise, it will only show you as the only person with a webcam. All right, you'll notice that there's an option there about meeting timers as well that you can turn off or on from them. Okay, I am going to jump out of the Zoom interface itself to talk a little bit about some of the other things on the Padlet wall. I've provided a lot more detail there. So I'm going to end my Zoom meeting down the bottom right, and as the host, I have the option of not only just leaving myself, but of ending it for everyone. And that's what I'm going to do. Okay, as soon as that happens, in the event that you did have saving of the chat requested, it will in fact bring up your Windows Explorer and show you the chat file straight away if you want to get a hold of the file. All right, looking back at the Zoom desktop app, I want to point out a few features in here that you may or may not be aware of. On the left-hand side, you'll notice that it gives me access to a few tools like the Zoom Whiteboards area. If you haven't used Zoom Whiteboards before, we do run a PD session around collaborative engagement tools, and we talk about Zoom Whiteboards a lot in there. It is an excellent tool because it allows you to basically prepare whiteboard spaces for students to collaborate in, and it doesn't need to be used inside Zoom. You can bring it in and open it in your Zoom meetings and let people engage with it, but it can be used outside of Zoom as well. So you can give people a link to it to engage with it. You can embed it within your subject sites inside Brightspace. It doesn't rely on them being part of the Zoom meeting. So it is a truly sort of collaborative asynchronous engagement tool which can be used, and you can have a look at all of the whiteboards that you've created in the past or create new ones from here or from that one tab inside the hub. Once you're in the live meeting, you can bring them in, find whiteboards, open them up, but you can always access these things outside the Zoom meetings. I think I've provided a link to it on the Padlet board, but if not, I'll drop it in the chat as well, Joe. The PD we run probably in the middle of the PD series. There's a calendar in here, but really this is just an integration with Teams, and it's going to pull up the same type of calendar that you can see in Teams and Outlook. Moving down, there's a function in here called clips. It's not that interesting. Zoom lets you make a clip on the spot that only will run for up to 5 minutes. I can make recordings longer than 5 minutes in a number of other different tools, so I'm not that interested in Zoom clips. I'm just telling you what it is. Under More, however, we get access to a few more interesting tools, and I am sorry that this is so small, the view for it, but you're welcome to open your own Zoom desktop app and have a look at what's listed under More. The thing I want to point out to you first is this little area called Hub, because this is a new function in Zoom. Inside the desktop app, the Hub tool will give you a consolidated view of all of your assets associated with Zoom. So not only will it give you access to recordings that have been made in Zoom, it will also let you look at any of the files that you have added to your Zoom meetings. They will be added in here underneath My Files. So you can get access to those from here. You can get access to your recordings in a list from here, any assets that you've shared, but they'll be in a giant list here that you can search through as well. So if you've got whiteboards that you've used, if you've got quizzes or polls that you've created in Zoom, if you've got text notes that you've shared, anything that you've used in a Zoom meeting can actually be accessed inside the Hub. It gives you kind of a one-stop shop access to anything that you've actually used in a Zoom meeting over the past 12 months, basically. So it's quite useful in that sense. If you're trying to track down something that you did in a Zoom meeting and you want to put hands on it, you can get access to all of those individual files. So in here, I've got files, I've got documents that I shared, I've got recordings, I've got whiteboards in here, for example, that I can see. All of those things can be tracked down and accessed through the Zoom Hub tool inside the desktop app. So it's quite powerful as a single point of reference for trying to track down things that you've used in a Zoom meeting. What else is in here? If we look underneath More, we have a couple of other tools that I'm very, very quickly going to talk about. Zoom Docs is something I would encourage you to play with, but basically it is a collaborative document that you can use in and outside of Zoom meetings. So when we talk about things like wikis, or a shared collaborative editing space for students to use, that's what a Zoom document is. You're creating a shared document that people can edit inside a Zoom meeting and outside the Zoom meeting, and you have control over where it's available and who it's available to. So it's a collaborative document tool, quite powerful in terms of what you can do with it, and I've provided details around it inside the Padlet wall, wherever I've hidden that. Where have I hidden that? Here we go. Right. If you scroll along this wall, you can have a look and find more information around these different functionalities. So here I'm talking about Zoom Docs and what it can do in there as well. But I'd encourage you to have a play around with it because it is quite versatile. There is another tool inside More called Zoom Notes, which is sort of a light text version of the document tool. It doesn't have the same level of functionality. I don't really know why they have two different text type collaborative sharing tools, but Docs is certainly a better tool in my opinion, far more versatile. Clips, as I mentioned, you can make clips that are very short in length, not all that useful. If we go back to our desktop app again, underneath More, I'll get rid of this message, you'll see that we also have access to things like the Surveys tool, which is Zoom language for quizzes and polls. They use the term surveys for everything, but it's where you can create polls and quizzes to be able to share with students in live Zoom meetings, and surveys, which is a poll or a quiz that you can share with students outside Zoom meetings. So the difference between the two, one of them is a synchronous set of tools for you to use inside any live Zoom meeting. So you create your polls or your quizzes before you go in and then bring them up whenever you want to use them. And a survey is one that you create to send to people outside of Zoom. That's the difference between the two. but all of them are organized under this banner of the word surveys, which is quite confusing really, because it's actually only one of the two different types of tool sets that they provide here. All right, so look, just in summary, because I realise we're 2 minutes over, have a look at the Padlet board because I've provided more detail in here against each of these different areas that we've talked about today. The main thing that I'd encourage you to do is just get familiar with accessing Zoom in those 3 different ways. The fact that you can access it through the desktop app, and that gives you access to certain types of tools and functions before you go into a Zoom meeting. The CSU Zoom portal, which is where you're going when you actually want to have access to your full level of settings, or maybe you want to access your recordings, for example. And then the actual LTI, the Brightspace integration inside your subject sites, where you actually have, you're concentrating on a very specific setting up of meetings that are going to be used by students and staff for one teaching session, and what students can get access to inside that space. So that's kind of our refresh for today. I'm happy to hang around and answer any specific questions that you have on any of this, or if you want to go into more detail on any part of this. But we have recordings around a lot of this stuff inside the Teaching Academy YouTube channel as well. And I think on the Padlet board, I've in fact linked to a lot of those longer recordings around individual functions within Zoom as well. But for those of you that need to run, I'll say thank you for joining me again today for another of these sessions, and I'm going to stop the recording there, and then we'll hang around for some questions. Let me turn on the webcam so you can see my face, but I'll stop recording. Thanks.